Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this session of the Government Operations and Fiscal Policy Committee. We have 3 items on our agenda this morning. We're going to kick off with a presentation on a report on our reserve policy that we received from the County Exec's Office in March of this year, and we thank our guests for being here today and the work they've done on this. And before we turn it over to them, I will turn it over to Mr. Smith to set the table for us.
Thank you, Council President Stewart and Go Committee. And again, thank you for Department of Finance, our colleagues from Davenport, as well as from Office of Management Budget being here today for this discussion. As noted, the Department of Finance had Davenport do an updated reserve policy study in March. The council staff's not going to spend a lot of time on that because that's what they're here for. I will note that Finance recently did the audited financials for fiscal 25. And so on your seats, as well as the presentation, you'll see it will have some of those updated numbers that is not in the packet, but the actual summary and context of what will be discussed is the same. And so, as noted in the packet, the council staff just pulled out some of the finer points that the Go Committee can consider as they go through this. But again, I'll turn it back to the GO chair for us to have Davenport present.
Great, thank you. And if we could add the new PowerPoint as an addendum, just for others who may go back to the packet on council so they have the updated and what we reviewed, that'd be great. And I also want to say thank you to Ms. Feldman and Bryant for coming over as well this morning. And I'm going to now turn it over to the Davenport team if you want to introduce yourself and go through your presentation.
Great. Thank you. Good morning. My name is Jennifer Derrickson. I'm a Senior Vice President at Davenport and Financial Advisor to the county. As already mentioned, we'll go through a few slides that are based off of our reserve policy study that was finalized in March of this year. We did update the numbers to reflect fiscal 24, but we have included the most recent March update that you saw in the appendix of this presentation as well. So we have both sets of slides. So if we start just on here on slide 3, reserve policy recommendations. Our recommendation was that the county maintain its current unrestricted general fund balance and revenue stabilization fund policy at the combined 10% of adjusted governmental revenues. The one change that we're recommending, though, for that particular fund reserve is that you have this mandatory annual contribution to the RSF, and we're suggesting that should be removed. And then in place of that, we're suggesting establishing 2 new reserves on top of that. That would be a risk mitigation reserve at 2% of adjusted governmental revenues, and a capital reserve at 1% of adjusted governmental revenues. So that would bring our recommended policy level from the 10% that it currently is to 13%. And that would bring you sort of above, and you'll see this later in the presentation, a number of other peer AAA peers and their policy levels. One thing that we wanted to note too is that we were suggesting that, for the proposed reserves, if they ever fell below those thresholds that we're recommending, that there would be that those reserves would be replenished to those targets within a 3-year period. That's something that the rating agencies are looking at, and over the last few years, the rating agencies have really put an emphasis on financial policies in their credit rating reviews and methodologies. So if we turn to slide 4 here, this is just a graphic showing how the reserves would be funded, and then we've also included on slide 5 how those reserves could be utilized. So just giving you information just on the flow of funds and how we would fund those as well. Just taking a look on slide 7 at the county's current reserve policy. Obviously, you have the 2 different portions. You have the unrestricted general fund balance, which has that cap of 5%. And then you have the Revenue Stabilization Fund, and together they should total 10% of AGR. You can see here on the chart on the bottom left, in the dark green, that's audited financial information in terms of how the county ended 2019 through 2024. In terms of those two reserves, you can see that the county did meet its 10% reserve policy in 21. And has exceeded that 10% since there was a slight decline in the two reserve levels in fiscal 24, bringing it down to about 15.9% of AGR. The light green bars are based off of the county's 26 through 31 fiscal plan. And so you can see that based off of the fiscal plan, the reserves are expected to go down to about 13.5% at the end of fiscal 25, and then 11.2% in fiscal 26. With your fiscal plan, you usually assume 10% that reserve remaining at 10% in the out years, but that's sort of just a planning tool. If we flip to slide 9, one of the things that we looked at in our when we were doing the reserve study is GFOA best practices. So GFOA recommends that local governments maintain a reserve that is a minimum of 2 months of operations. So we took a look at your reserves using AGR as a denominator, which is what your current policy is based off of, and then just looking at, if we looked at it as using general fund reserves. And you can see that as of fiscal 24, the county's current policy only represented about 58 days, so just shy of that 60-day benchmark that GFOA has put out there. When you look at it on a general fund basis, that comes out to 88 days. If you were to take the county's current policy, reserves down to the policy level of 10%, that would actually bring, if you spent it all the way down to the 10%, that would bring you down to about 37 days from the 58 that you are at in fiscal 24. In addition to looking at GFOA, we also wanted to take a look at how the rating agencies were calculating your reserves. Reserves are probably, the most important credit metric that all three of those the rating agencies look at. And so understanding how they calculate reserves and how that aligns with how the county is currently calculating reserves is, just a good understanding to have. And so on the left-hand side of the page, you'll see a chart that is marked as Fitch and S&P. So that first column labeled CGR, that's your current reserve policy. You can see that it includes the RSF, and then it includes the unassigned fund balance as a percentage of AGR, which gets you to about 15.9%. Fitch and S&P have somewhat similar. They also look at just general fund. Fitch looks at not only the RSF and the committed fund balance, but the remainder of the committed fund balance, and they add in the assigned fund balance. And then they, in terms of their denominator, they're looking at general fund expenditures plus transfers out. So a little bit different than the denominator that the county is using. And you can see that based off of their calculation, you come out to about 28.1%. S&P is a little bit different. They use actually the same numerator. They use the full committed fund balance, assigned and unassigned. And then their denominator is actually general fund revenues. And so they come out at 28.6. So not much difference between the way that Fitch and S&P calculate. Moody's on the right-hand side is a little bit different. So unlike Fitch and S&P that use just the general fund, Moody's utilizes all funds. So they look at all governmental funds, all business activities, internal service funds. And so they utilize all of those funds to determine, what that reserve level is, and then also use the revenues in all of those funds to do their calculations. So you can see that what they call the available fund balance ratio comes out to about 27.7. So, slightly lower than what Fitch and S&P are calculating. So the next slide just shows, some peer comparisons. So the rating agencies utilize peer comparisons when they're, looking at credit ratings. They want to make sure that, metrics including reserves are in line with other like-rated entities. Here we have two charts. We have the chart on the left is actually what was included in the final report. It shows where Montgomery County was in 2019, 2022, and 2023, and then the peer information is based off of 22 information. And then the right-hand side is actually updated. So this is using fiscal 24 for everyone. And you can see that, even with the decline in the reserve in 2024, that the county is still, in line with that peer median and above the peer median for Maryland and Virginia. Still in a good place. I think this is definitely something to watch because, as we already talked about, there's an expected spend down in 25 and 26. And so this is going to be something that the county is going to need to track as we move forward to make sure, that, your AAA ratings are maintained. This slide 13 shows adopted reserve policy minimums. So just like on the last slide, the left-hand slide is what was in the final report, and then the right-hand slide has been updated. And you can see that, between the information from, 23 to 24, there have been a few that have updated their policies. And you can see that reflected really in the peer median, not really in the peer median for Maryland and Virginia. That's remained the same at about 8%. But the policy minimum for the full peer group increased from 10% to 15%. So you have some peers outside of Maryland and Virginia that have strengthened their policies over the last year. And so, at the 10%, the county is still above the peer median for Maryland and Virginia, but below the peer median for the whole group. The other, when we were doing this policy, in addition to looking at the rating agencies and GFOA recommendations, GFOA also put out a piece about looking at taking a risk-based approach to reserves. So assessing what are the county's risks and, how can you quantify them and, prepare, size of reserve that could offset those risks. So there were a number of risk exposures that we looked at. We looked at the performance of general fund revenue. So we looked at original budget, actual performance. And in 6 of the last 10 years, general fund revenues have ended under budget by average of about $42 million. We also looked at expenditures, original budget to actuals. And in the 8 of the last 10 years, total general fund balance or expenditures have been supplemented during the fiscal year and have exceeded the approved budget by average amount of about $70.3 million. The other thing that we noted, and this, applies to all Maryland counties, but, limited budgetary flexibility. So obviously all Maryland counties are subject to MOE, when you look at the maintenance of effort as a percentage of budget, the education budget represents about just over 58% of the county's spending in fiscal 24. In addition to the MOE, you also have additional fixed costs. So you have your debt service, your pension contributions, your OPEB contributions. These are things that the rating agencies are also looking at. And when you add those in, in addition to the MOE, the county only has just under about 24% actually that's flexible that you could potentially cut. And so, that's, a risk to the county given that that's, a smaller percentage. There's also the income tax. Obviously, the income tax max went up to 3.3%, so there's still a little flexibility there. But a number of counties, including the county, had been at the 3.2. And so I think, that's also a potential risk as well. Exposure to the federal government. So when we originally did the report, that was definitely a risk, but obviously has become more of a risk as the federal budget cuts and job losses have come to fruition. So I think planning for that, no one really knows what the impact of that is going to be at this point, but given that the county is home to, a number of federal facilities, has high, government funding. So I think that's something to keep in mind as well. And then debt and long-term liabilities, which we kind of already talked about. The one positively, the county's debt has actually declined by about $50 million since 2019. So that's a positive. I know that you all have made an effort to really bring down your GO bond issuance, and you've really stuck with that. So I think that has really shown, and I think that has provided some flexibility. In terms of the OPEB, I know that you have a plan to fund OPEB, to get to a 75% funded ratio, and so you're still, working towards that as well. So based off of those risk factors, we had taken a look and tried to come up with, an amount for the risk mitigation reserve. And you can see here that I've included the calculation for 23 and 24. This is about 2% of AGR. Obviously, since it's based off of AGR, it's going to move each year since it's a percentage of that calculation. And you can see in 23 it was about 122, but based off of current calculations, it'd be about 129.5 million. And so that kind of gives you an overview of what we were proposing in our reserve study. As I mentioned, we included the original slides here in the appendix, but happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you for the report and the presentation today. Ms. Bryan, Ms. Feldman, anything you'd like to add or reactions to the report?
Jennifer Bryant, Director, Office of Management and Budget. No, this is great work by our consultant, and certainly something that the county executive will have to take into consideration moving forward. I don't yet know where he is on recommendations based on the report, but I'm sure there will be something coming forward once the discussions start with full council.
Thank you so much. All right, I'll kick us off. I have a number of questions, but Ms. Dierkesen, you talked about this a little bit. I know when you all were doing this analysis in the report, it was before this winter, and you pointed to changes at the federal level. But I guess I wanted to dig into that a little bit more in terms of the recommendations you have, given the federal situation, given the downgrading of some of our neighbors from the financial institutions. Are there any other things that we should be on the lookout for? Reflecting on that, are there things that you would go back and look at more in depth at this point?
I mean, I think...
I think your mic's not on.
Oh,
yeah, that's okay.
Sorry about that. I mean, I think with the risk mitigation reserve, obviously, I think, with the job losses that could potentially impact the income taxes, which I think is captured in the revenue variance amount, the 42 million. We've also included this other risk contingency of about 17.2 million to offset any additional potential, risks that we talked about that couldn't necessarily be quantified. So I think the 2% risk mitigation reserves gives you a good buffer in terms of what could potentially happen. But I mean, that is an ever-changing situation, and I think no one's really sure how that's going to ultimately impact the county, but it's something, as you said, that the rating agencies are definitely looking at. It's going to be a conversation that the county is going to have with the rating agencies, in terms of they've been asking questions for other local governments in Maryland that have come to market, so it's something that's definitely at the forefront.
A question I had on pages 12 and 13, and
Yes.
thank you for updating the report, the slides. The new chart doesn't include Prince George's, and I just wondered if that, you're smiling, so there must be a reason behind it.
Yep. So Prince George's was downgraded by
Yes.
Moody's. Yep.
Okay.
So they were downgraded in March or May of 2025 this year. They had originally had a negative outlook put on them in May of 24. The primary reason why the negative outlook was put on, and then also the subsequent downgrade, was a decline in their reserves, and they also had increased leverage as well. That being said, between the time that they put the negative outlook on in 24 and 25, obviously everything with the federal government has happened, and Moody's did note that as an additional risk in the report as well. So that is why they are not included on the slide.
Yep, I figured as much, and I just wanted to make sure
Yeah.
as folks are looking at
Sorry,
this, because
yeah.
lots of times we, here in Montgomery County, we're looking to our neighbors and trying to glean, how they're being rated and everything. So I appreciate that explanation. I have a bunch of other questions, but I don't want to monopolize. I don't know, Councilmember Katz?
Yeah, thank you. I guess I should put on my microphone. Thank you very much for the presentation, and thank you for doing what you do. I'm very comforted by your suggestions, and I'm very appreciative of what you're advising us to do as a consultant with additional eyes from the outside. I came from a municipality that didn't have debt, and when I first came here, and I looked at the debt of Montgomery County, it would have been the third largest department that Montgomery County had if it were a department. It scared me beyond anything else. And the government operations, the prior one as well as this one, really has thought about and worked towards reducing it. Mm-hmm. I mean, you can't be without debt in this situation, but you certainly can have a handle on it. And I think that's what we're attempting to do, and I appreciate your suggestions. As far as reserves, I've always thought as the 10% reserve, which is what we've had prior, and I think that is something that you don't ever touch. Yeah. That this is hands off. This is a quote unquote savings account that all you do is get it with the interest. You don't ever touch the principal. But now what you're suggesting, and I'm asking, for the other two reserves that are all reserves handled the same way? Do you not touch the other two?
No, I think the thought would be is that 10% sort of remains what you just said, sort of sacrosanct. You don't really necessarily want to touch those. And there is a flow of, funds that we included in terms of use of reserves. But with the capital reserve and the risk mitigation reserve is really there that, if those risks come to fruition, you could utilize some of that. That could be available to use, on a rainy day,
It's literally a rainy day fund.
Yeah.
Right.
And then for the capital reserve, that's there to support like economic growth and strategic investment. So, obviously with tax-based growth or, offsetting any sort of maybe federal implications from the federal actions, you could utilize that fund for, one-time, not reoccurring, purposes. And that would only be 1%, but those are a little bit more fungible in terms of being utilized. There are, specific reasons, and in the report we recommend what would be needed from council in order to utilize those funds. So there are steps in place before they could be utilized, but the 10% reserve really should
Yeah,
remain.
leave that.
Yes.
And do you call everything the same? Do you call everything reserves, or do you figure that you should be able to, because I don't want the public to think like you got to leave all this alone.
Yeah, no, I think that's why we have the different names for them. The risk mitigation reserve and the capital reserve, and then you have your county government reserves, which includes your unrestricted and your revenue stabilization fund. And those would, our thinking is that they, from your audited financials.
Yep.
I'm not an accountant, but the thought would be that there would be possibly different line items for those.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I appreciate it, and you do a very good job.
Thank you.
All right, now
There
we
you
have. Great. Actually, I wanted to pick up, because one of the questions I had before I turned to Councilmember Friedson was on, I think about our fiscal policies. Is important to have them guide us, but it's also important that the public understand at some degree what we're doing. And right now, it's really confusing for people, the two different parts we have of this. It comes up every budget, and we try to explain it. I agree, as Councilmember Katz said, I think where the direction you're going in makes a lot of sense. I have a hesitancy of making this even more complicated, honestly. And what would be the downsides or potential of just having a recommendation that we bump our combined reserves to 13%?
I mean,
Yeah.
I guess my initial thought is if you did bump it to 13%, would you view that additional amount as being able to be utilized? I guess.
Like Councilmember Katz's question.
Yeah, because I think the reason that we sort of segregated it is we wanted to sort of make sure that, that 10% was over here and sort of remained. We don't want to touch that, but the additional two reserves were kind of segregated for that reason, to allow use if needed when the time came. But I think if you got to the 13%, I think it would I think you get to the same place. But I guess the question is what would be the stipulations around how that could potentially be utilized?
Great. Thank you for that, Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for the work. This is really helpful and sobering. I will say I did note the Prince George's County being left off, and I think it speaks to the importance of us having this conversation, not as a criticism of them, but as a reflection and a recognition of the situation that we're in regionally, that we need to be really mindful and really thoughtful about this. I think two things I just want to note. One, the reserve conversation shouldn't be its own conversation. It has to be in the broader context of our budget decisions and our fiscal policies. And I think that's where I think we have missed the mark up to this point. I think we've done a really good job with the reserves, and I think we deserve credit for that. I think we've really done a good job of bringing down our debt, and we should be talking about that more from a fiscal policy standpoint. But the reserve policy and the fiscal policies are only as good as a structural deficit dynamic. And we have done a bad job of that. And I think if we're going to have this conversation, then we need to be honest and serious. If this is just a cushion to allow us to feel confident and comfortable that we can continue to move forward with structural deficits in our budgets, then I don't think it's a particularly serious fiscal policy. So I just think we have to include that into the conversation. We need to really talk about that. I would rather keep us closer to 10% and not have structural deficits, personally. I think that's a much easier thing to do. I think it's much clearer to the public, as the council president and chair noted. But I just, I think it's unhelpful for us to have these fiscal conversations in vacuums, and I think too often that's what we do, where we, on both sides, the criticism of what we do and the patting of our back when it's perhaps somewhat unwarranted, as well. So I just wanted to note that because I think it's important. I have mixed feelings about the different accounts here. In some ways, a family needs to have a savings account, but there's overwhelming data to demonstrate that if you don't have a separate college savings account and a separate retirement account and a separate emergency savings account, that you're not going to have enough savings, because it's just human nature to overcalculate what you expect each to cover. And so there is, a certain dynamic of that. I appreciate the thought, because some of this really isn't reserves how we have thought about it. It's actually dedicated to capital investments, one-time investments, which I have been advocating for years, of using one-time additional resources that we have in good times, not for ongoing expenses that create structural challenges, but for investments that will lead to long-term economic growth, transportation infrastructure, storm water management, housing. I mean, there's certain areas that I have advocated for. I thought we missed opportunities, things that I thought we could have done and should have done during the pandemic. But I think this would push us in that direction. So I like that, because it's pretty consistent with things that I have advocated for and talked about. But I do think it's important, speaking of the public, to really understand when you say don't touch it, the 10%, what do you mean by that? Because I think the public understandably would expect, as there are tons of needs and as they're paying significant amount of taxes and fees where this money is actually coming from, of what does it mean to hold 10% in reserve and not touch it? We do have to have it there to touch at a certain point. The question is, under what circumstances? And so could you just talk about what your thoughts and expectations are for that from a policy standpoint? And I just think it's important that we talk about that publicly, because I think that's a big point of conversation that people have when they think about the reserves.
Yeah. I mean, I see your point. I mean, I think with the unrestricted general fund balance and the revenue stabilization fund, those could be utilized. I mean, the unrestricted general fund balance for severe economic stress, which what we're proposing, the other two funds wouldn't be able to cover. With the revenue stabilization fund, that could be used. That would be used last to support unfunded appropriations for events of emergency nature. So really, when I say they should remain intact, I think they're there, but for an extremely rainy day. If you utilize those, there could possibly be negative rating pressure. I think that had been a discussion with the rating agencies as you built up to the 10%. You had like a 10-year plan to build up to the 10%, which you got to in 2021. And so, drawing those funds down below the 10% policy could trigger some negative rating pressure potentially.
Yeah, I understand that. I think it would be helpful. I think the numbers are the numbers, and I think we could have a debate. Should it be 10%? Should it be 12%? Should it be 9%? Should it be 13%? I mean, I honestly think the rating agencies care less about what the number actually is and care more about whether or not we have a policy and we stick to the policy. At least my experience with the rating agencies, obviously you want to be within a reasonable range and want to be able to handle, and withstand unforeseen circumstances, and we're in some of those right now, and it's probably going to get worse, not better, at least for the next several years as we try to stabilize our economic environment here regionally and statewide. But I think we need to really clarify, to me, what would be most helpful as we have this ongoing conversation. And it would be nice to hear what the county executive is for. We've been hearing quite a lot about what he's against. So anytime he wants to share with us his actual positions on how to actually move the county forward, we would always welcome and appreciate that. It's a much more constructive way to govern from my perspective. I think we need to understand, whether or not we create different accounts or not. I mean, we're going to have different accounts in the sense we're going to have undesignated reserves and we're going to have some type of revenue stabilization, which we currently have. We have 2. Whether we add to 3 or 4, I mean, I think we can have a discussion about that. But I think what we really need to focus on, and I don't think we've had enough conversation, is exactly under what circumstances we utilize certain funds. Like, what does undesignated reserves mean? Is this just money outside the regular budget process as priorities change and things arise? Is this only to meet, unforeseen dynamics over time and, a personnel crisis, a human crisis, et cetera? Is this for, a cushion for economic downturns? At what point is a rainy day a really rainy day? I mean, we have not really defined that to the extent that I think that we could and we should, and I don't think that has been clear among policymakers, and it certainly is not clear among the public. And so, I to me, that is the key takeaway that we should come out of this conversation in the end, not today necessarily, but as we continue it, of not just, what are the numbers and what do we call the accounts, but very specifically, what do we expect those accounts to be used for? When is it appropriate and when is it not appropriate? And then do we stick to it? Because that is the key here. And then I'll just reiterate, where I started, none of this really matters if we use it as a cushion and as an excuse to have structural deficits year in and year out. And that is the current scenario that we have been in, where we have used this as our rationale to say, well, we have a $150 million structural deficit again this year, but it's fine because we got our reserves up to 11.2%. And that is not going to cut it as we move forward, especially as we likely expect the revenue picture to fail to meet expectations, unfortunately, as we move forward, and the risk to be to the downside more than the upside, at least for the next couple of years. So with that, I'll yield back.
Yes, Ms. Ellen? Yeah.
Yes, Nancy Feldman, Department of Finance. I did want to make one comment about the RSF. The RSF is very clear that it can only be used for unfunded appropriations. So once council has approved a budget, if revenues are short, you can use the RSF, right? You can't use it to fund a new project, an additional project, et cetera. So I think the RSF in the policy and in the code is very clear. The undesignated can be and is used for supplementals, special appropriations, et cetera, at the council's approval. So maybe that framework is where you're focused, unless you would like to and consider changing the RSF.
Thank you. Okay. Great. Well, I think just trying to think of as we move forward. Today was supposed to be a briefing as we've got to raise questions, and I think I have a couple of other questions just to think about in the fall where we pick up this conversation again. There's probably 3 main recommendations, and one of them was to remove the mandatory annual contribution to the RSF. In the presentation today, it sounded like something different than I got from reading the report, which is always great to have a presentation, which is that recommendation is linked to the other recommendations to create the risk. And you wouldn't do that one in isolation of following the other recommendations.
I mean, that is how we, that was our recommendation. I know that you all have, in the last few years, I think, not gone forward with the mandatory contribution. So that's something that could potentially be viewed, but we were seeing sort of them as an offset to each other, not having that mandatory contribution to the RSF requirement, but at the same time increasing those other reserves that you could utilize for the various purposes that we talked about. We saw it as an offset to each other, yes.
Great. And I think, Mr. Smith, this might be a question for you, but one of the other things that piqued my interest when we were having the presentation today was the recommendation for if you did dip into the reserves below a certain level, having the 3-year period of plan for replenishment. And we don't have that right now currently in our policy. Is that correct?
I'll have to correct you. Yes, we do have that in our policy.
Oh, we do?
For our
Okay.
council resolution. In fact, in March of 2021, yeah.
Okay,
So,
it is there. Okay.
the policy resolution in the packet was amended. That's why it's from 2021. So, so that's why council staff didn't note it in the packet, because it was consistent with current policy. Great.
Just wanted to clarify that as well. Terrific. Any other questions from colleagues? All right. I think our next steps, I appreciate the comments of my colleague, Councilmember Friedson, of really taking a holistic look at our policies and what we're doing, taking these recommendations under consideration. Ms. Feldman and Ms. Bryant, it would be very helpful to know when the county executive might have opinions on this. As we move forward as the council, the next meeting we have, hopefully in the fall, to take this up again and see where we want to go. It would be helpful to have more reactions from the county exec's office on your views of what direction. I don't think it would behoove us to have the council and this committee go in a direction that is not necessarily informed by, maybe not agree, but it would be silly to go in a direction not informed by the county exec's office, who has had this report for a bit now. And so if we could receive maybe before the end of August, so that we can plan our our fall agenda, when the county executive would be prepared to provide his reactions to this report. That would be very helpful to us. Good. All right, Mr. Smith, anything else?
Not for me.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you very much. We appreciate the excellent report, and we will get back to this. Thank you very much. Thank you. All right. Next up, we have Bill 5-25, demolition tax for affordable housing production. Ms. Wellens is joining us, and we have virtually Councilmember Mink, who is the lead sponsor on this. Councilmember Mink, if you're with us, if you wanted to kick us off and tell us about your bill, and I'll turn it over to Ms. Wellens to start us through the packet.
Great, thank you, Madam President. This is a bill that will increase the funding that we have for affordable housing construction, something that we very much need to do, and it does so by levying a demolition tax. So when someone goes to flip a home for profit, this is not somebody who is flipping a house that they are going to live in themselves. This is not somebody who is updating a home that's in disrepair. This is a flip for profit targeting initiative. Then they will pay a fee that goes into the HIF, which goes towards HOC's Housing Production Fund. More now than ever, we need to be really precisely targeting investments toward proven programs like this one. It's already on track to build 5,000 units over a 20-year window, and this bill, again, increases funding specifically for that. There is widespread agreement that this fund is a successful, powerful tool. It's a pride of Montgomery County. There's a delegation coming from Hawaii next month to learn about it and how they might be able to do something like it. The state legislature passed a bill creating Maryland's Housing Innovation Fund, which could match these funds. Delegate Vaughn Stewart, who led that bill, has written a letter of support, which is in the packet. Just this Tuesday, when asked what our biggest housing crisis is and how we can alleviate it, our excellent nominee for DHCA's Deputy Director, Jenny Snap, said that we need more affordable housing and named increasing funding through this fund specifically for affordable housing construction as a means to do so. So we do need to increase these funds, and this is a way to do it that doesn't pull from the existing operating budget. It doesn't compete with other important housing programs that we have increased funding for, like home ownership, also really important. And who it impacts is very fair. It's not taxpayers. It is a slight impact on those who are making a large profit off of a process that is making homes more expensive. It's going to help us raise revenue where we need it most by asking people who are buying tear down homes to flip to pay $20,000 more on homes that are then selling for $3 million, $4 million or more. As I've been talking about this with community members, this might be the most universally popular bill that I have discussed with them, and I think those are some of the reasons why. I want to thank for their support SEIU Local 500, McGeo, the League of Women Voters, the Montgomery County Community Action Board, Delegate Vaughn Stewart, the Muslim Community Center, Jews United for Justice, CASA, Montgomery County DSA, Everyday Canvassing, and Justice and Advocacy Coalition. And there are also some real important exemptions that are in the bill as well. We're not looking to have the goal necessarily of stymieing production. I think that's a different conversation. This is fundamentally the priority here is funding the Housing Production Fund, funding the HIF, which is why the fee is only $20,000 out of obviously a much broader profit margin, and I think that those exemptions are very much appropriate. So I really appreciate the GO Committee for their work and conversation about this, and look forward to the conversation.
Great. Thank you very much, Councilmember Mink. I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Wellens to walk us through the packet. I do want to note we have a number of folks who have joined us today. So if there are questions, we have folks from the Department of Permitting Services. We also have people here from OHC and also our planning department. So we can call upon them if we have questions regarding this. But Ms. Wellens, I will turn it to you.
Great. Thank you, Madam President. Good morning, council members. Just to expand a little bit upon Councilmember Mink's description, again, this bill would create an excise tax. It would apply to certain total demolitions or partial demolitions of attached or detached single-family homes. I'm oversimplifying this, but the partial demolition would be essentially more than 50% demolition of the single family home, whereas a total demolition under the way it's defined under the code would be 67% or more of a demolition of the structure. And then this tax would apply only when the replacement home exceeds the square footage of the original single-family home. And then there are a number, as Councilmember Mink stated, would be a number of exemptions from the tax, and I'll just quickly note those for purposes of your discussion. The demolition or partial demolition would be exempt from the tax if the original home was deemed unsafe or condemned, if the replacement home would be a moderately priced dwelling unit, if the owner would be occupying the replacement home as their principal residence for a minimum of 5 years. I mentioned the gross floor area issue already. So, and then also if the replacement home is necessary due to a medical condition or disability of an individual, and that would be a situation where the owner would have to make this case to the Department of Permitting Services, submit required documentation, and then the Department of Permitting Services would evaluate whether that exemption applies. And then finally, if there was a natural disaster or other factors beyond the owner's control, there would be an available exemption from the tax. In terms of the issues noted in the packet, I'm looking at page 4 of the staff memorandum, and the first issue was just drilling down with some additional information on demolition data in the county. The Ms. Gavoni from Department of Planning and also the Department of Permitting Services dove in and provided some analysis and some data over the past, I guess it's back to 2010, and showing that there's an average number of demolitions of 207 a year in the county. And if you have questions, Ms. Gavoni can explain this much better than I can, but at the bottom of page 5, you'll see a table that's showing the number of demolitions where then the resulting home is owner occupied. And this would relate to one of the exemption for situations in which the owner is going to occupy the home for at least 5 years. Occupy the replacement home for at least 5 years. But what's a little bit complex is that if there was a transfer of ownership, so if it's a company, for example, flipping a home, the exemption might not apply because it's applying when the owner is the same basically before and after, and that same owner is going to occupy for 5 years. That's when that exemption applies. But I'll pause there, and I don't know if there are any questions for the departments related to some of this data.
Oh, any questions regarding the data presented on pages 4, 5, and 6? No, not at this time.
Okay, great. Item number 2 on page 6 of the staff memorandum. This is simply providing some additional context for the committee about other potentially applicable taxes that, if the demolition is related to the sale of the property, obviously the recordation taxes and transfer taxes would apply. As you already know, the recordation taxes have some dedicated purposes, including to capital improvements, rent assistance, and MCPS. And then those revenues are estimated around $50 million a year for the transfer tax. The purposes aren't designated, and the revenues are about $105 million annually. That sums up kind of just the background context. And if you're okay, I'll just go into item 3, unless there are any questions or comments.
Yep, we can
Okay.
continue.
Great. So item number 3 relates to a potential amendment by the council president, which I don't know if you'd like me to describe it, Madam President.
Sure, I get it. Thank you, Ms. Wellens, for walking through. So, in looking at this, one of the things as I looked at the bill was trying to think of, unintended consequences of what might happen, and not wanting to discourage any type of building or folks coming into the county, and so, or taking away from some really good programs that we have right now. And so I'll start with number 8 was actually exempting an owner of a nonprofit organization that covens to offer the replacement single-family home for lease or sale under a program to benefit households of limited income or limited net worth. We know that Habitat for Humanity, HIP, and a number of other nonprofit agencies have been doing excellent work coming and purchasing homes, sometimes in conjunction with our municipalities and sometimes in conjunction with the county, to then rebuild them and be able to increase home ownership among certain groups in our community, and just wanted to make sure they were, in addition to all the costs, knowing how hard it is for them to do that work, that they weren't then needing to come up with another $20,000 or something for that. So that was that exemption. And then number 7 Also, given the work that the county council has done and the ZTA that we passed on Monday, was to make sure that if there were someone interested in demolishing a single-family home and replacing that by a multifamily dwelling, including a duplex or a triplex, that again, because that is incentivizing and increasing our housing stock in the county, I didn't want there to be any potential detractors from that. So I'm also offering that be exempted from this as well. So, let's see. Councilmember Mink has a comment.
I just wanted to thank you for those amendments, and especially to note the importance of the nonprofit exemption. I think that one is really key because they're in a different bucket from the folks that we are talking about. We want to incentivize more of that, and they also are. We're not cutting. We don't want to cut into their profits because they are nonprofits. So it's important that we not, as you said, slim their margins anymore. So thank you for addressing that and appreciate the work.
Great. Any thoughts on the amendments?
Fine with me. The amendments are fine.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. The next issue for your consideration, item number 4 in the staff memorandum, bottom of page 8, top of page 9. This would be some potential clarifying amendments. The Department of Housing and Community Affairs and also the Department of Finance recommended some clarifying language regarding the use of the demolition tax revenues. This is really to properly capture the sponsor's intent for how these revenues would be used for bonds issued by HOC for the Housing Production Fund. And the language the council staff originally had wasn't capturing that purpose. So this new language, which has also been reviewed by bond counsel, would do that. So that's under the amendments that's shown at the top of page 9 regarding use of revenues. We have Ms. Pofin and Ms. Feldman available, and a thank you to both of their departments for unpacking this and, quickly consulting with bond counsel to get the clarification.
Great. Any questions on that? Any objections? No, without objection.
And then the second part of this item is the DHCA and Finance also pointed out that when in paragraph number 2 of subsection E, where we're saying that funds will be used solely for this purpose, the point was raised that if there's a situation where there are more funds from the demolition tax than needed solely for the contract payments on the HOC bonds, what happens then, essentially? And so one potential amendment for your consideration would be to amend subsection E to include the, amendment that you already approved, the clarification of the language, but then to say that this could be used for the Housing Production Fund, or, it could be used for another purpose under the Montgomery Housing Initiative approved by council resolution with the agreement of the executive. And that's just language that, council staff came up with for your consideration to handle the solely issued and the issue of the use of the word solely. And again, we have department staff here if you have questions or would like to discuss that.
Mm-hmm. Any questions on that? No, I think without objection, we're good.
There are a couple of, the next item is item number 5, bottom of page 9, top of page 10, additional clarifying amendments from the Office of the County Attorney. There are some cross-references in the bill in terms of definitions between the new tax that would be under the bill, the new section of code that would be added by this bill, and Chapter 8, the existing Chapter 8 of the code in terms of how demolition is defined. And the county attorney's office recommended making sure that the language of Chapter 8 and this new section that would be added are more aligned than they were as the bill is originally drafted. So basically this amendment here for your consideration was drafted by council staff in order to try to capture the clarifications that the Office of the County Attorney requested. And I have shared, I did share this with them, and they didn't share with me any objections to the clarification. So if you'd like me to further explain it, happy to do so. But
No,
it's really just an effort to clarify the definition.
And I just want to make sure, was it shared with DPS, just because they're the ones who are going to actually be, and they're good with the clarifications and?
I would defer to them. Yes, I mean, it was shared with everyone, but I don't know that, I don't want to speak for DPS or,
Yeah.
and
You're
I'm
good?
not sure. DPS isn't here. Oh, okay.
Oh, DPS is not here yet? Okay, all right. All right, well, okay, let's just put a pin in that.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't have any objections. I don't think my colleagues do, but I do have some follow-up questions regarding DPS.
Okay.
And so thought they were going to be here to discuss this bill, so.
I thought so, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay. Let's just continue.
Okay. Great, put a pin in that one. Item number 6, these are some operational considerations where unfortunately, DPS's input might be helpful as well, but these were some operational issues raised by the Office of the County Attorney. They just highlighted the point that there would be some determinations that DPS would have to make under the bill regarding exemptions. Obviously this would require some discretion and some staff power. So they were bringing up that point for the committee's attention. They also suggested that they were uncertain the way the bill was drafted, if when an owner is required to covenant, that certain things will happen in order to qualify for an exemption. They wanted to know, well, what does that really consist of? Would that be, a new agreement with the county? Would that be an affidavit? And then finally, they brought up a question of whether hardship exemptions should be available if the taxpayer is unable to fulfill a covenant to occupy the replacement home for 5 years, job loss or something else unexpected. Should DPS have the flexibility to provide exemptions in those types of cases? So council staff has drafted some amendments to with potential ways to alleviate some of the issues raised by OCA, one just being to explicitly authorize regulations, that the DPS could issue regulations regarding the determination and administration of the exemptions, regarding what's required for the certifications or covenants under the bill, and the record retention requirements under the bill. And then the other potential amendment for your consideration would be to add another exemption for the hardship situation. So it would be adding an exemption for if the owner demonstrates that the owner is unable to fulfill a covenant under paragraph 3, that's the one about occupying the home for 5 years, due to an unforeseen hardship such as loss of employment or medical condition or disability. With the prior amendment you adopted, this wouldn't actually be paragraph 7, it would be paragraph 9. So those are for consideration. Again, I can understand if you need DPS's input. But.
Yeah, I'm just going to say it's a little frustrating that DPS isn't here, because I think there's some things, because they're going to be kind of overseeing this if it moves forward, but I'll turn it over to Councilmember Friedson.
Yeah, I don't even know if you can answer this, but we'll try. I'm trying to understand how they would view the owner. Because, there's basically two types of teardowns. There's a speculative teardown where a custom home builder buys, a lot, tears the house down, sells it, puts it up for sale, the speculative home. They're carrying it for basically 9 months to a year while they go through the process, while they build the house, and they sell it on the open market. That's one type. There's another type where a purchaser buys a house and then hires a builder to build a house for them. They own the property. The question is, I'm trying to follow it, the maze of exemptions here. In order to qualify for an exemption for the 5 years, I mean, if you're buying a property and hiring a builder to build a custom house, you're going to live there for 5 years, I would imagine, or else it would be a really lousy investment. Does it need to be your principal residence? Do you need to live and occupy in the house that is eventually being torn down? Or is this to differentiate it between a speculative home that's being built versus a purchase of a lot by a property owner who intends to occupy the house once it's eventually rebuilt?
Right. Okay. I think I understand. So the scenario would be if I'm an owner, or I'm an individual, I buy a piece of property with a home on it, and I then demolish the home to rebuild my custom home. So that's, and I covenant, yeah, I'm going to be occupying this for 5 years. The tax wouldn't apply to me. The demolition tax would not apply as the way the bill is drafted. But if I am, a real estate investor and I buy the lot and I demolish and then rebuild, the tax would apply.
Got it. So this is only for spec teardowns.
Right. It is not for I buy a property and
So
I,
I
as
mean,
the
that's
owner, am gonna
that takes
yeah.
a small subset of teardowns and makes it an even smaller subset of teardowns. So we're really not talking about a lot here. Okay, I'll yield back. Thank you for clarifying that.
So I'm going to ask my questions I would have asked of DPS and Ms. Wellens. I'm not sure you can answer them, but I feel like I need to get them out there, and maybe we can get them. So I guess and I appreciate the language you put in here as suggested on the bottom of page 10 and 11, because one of the things I wanted to make sure is in the covenants that, if there were circumstances that someone needed to sell their home before the 5 years, whether it's death in the family, divorce, like there's, between COVID and what's happening at the federal government right now, we can see people's lives are turned upside down on a dime. And I think the worst thing that could happen to someone who is experiencing something in their lives and needing to sell their home is that they would get a tax bill from the county for $20,000 on top of that. So my emphasis here would be, and I see it talks about method 2 regulations, is that the process in thinking about how somebody would have to document and go through that process was super easy and clear. Because again, I don't want a family who, as Councilmember Friesen said, if you're going to do this, it's probably you're investing a lot. You're thinking, okay, we bought a property. We're building our dream home, and then something happens in their lives and they get a $20,000 bill from the county. And so I don't know if you have any, I know you've worked on some languages here, but I do want to make sure that as this moves forward, that process is crystal clear and we're not adding anything more burdensome to a family.
Right. I mean, the process would be specified in the regulations, and so I think that would be, really part of that drafting. It would kind of put that responsibility on DPS to make the process clear to the homeowner, to make it clear under the language of the regulation, which, as method 2 would be subject to an up or down by the county council. I would note in terms of the process, it would be interesting because it'd have to be, assuming that this, whatever the crisis or, situation occurred, 2 years down the line or something, it would be a situation where that homeowner, they already would have paid the tax, right? And then they would be getting essentially a rebate of some kind for the county. So that would be
No,
another
because
issue to
no,
clarify.
they wouldn't pay the tax because of their principal home.
Right. I'm sorry.
Right.
I'm sorry.
So they,
Yes.
they may not
wouldn't
even
pay
know
the
this
tax.
exists, right? So
You're
it's-
right. Yes.
right.
And so then
Yeah.
they would get the bill. I'm sorry.
No,
Yes.
it's okay. It's confusing.
Got it.
It's like,
I
no. I mean, that's my concern, right? And and we have this conversation all the time because of our different tax systems and other things. And every time people get their tax bill, their property tax bills, we get a flood of phone calls of people figuring it out. This is not necessarily clear for folks. So I think as I just wanted to put that on the record that it is a concern of mine, and I want to make sure that as we're thinking about this, that we have a clear process. The other thing, and again, this is for DPS, I did note in the fiscal impact statement, it did say that DPS was not going to need any other staff or staff resources to administer this bill. If I'm reading that correctly, and I just kind of questioned that, given the number of exemptions, and given what the conversation we just had. Given the task at DPS and the fact that they couldn't show up today, I just want to make sure that that it's what we're asking DPS to take on is something that they can take on here, and understanding that we do it all the time when we pass bills. We did something for the Office of Consumer Protection that I fully supported and I thought was a good idea to move forward with, but we knew going into that what staffing was needed, and I think it's very important for us to understand that. So that was just another question I had. Yeah.
Yeah, and apologies. I don't know if there was a miscommunication or what happened, but obviously I'm happy to follow up with DPS post-meeting.
On those, yeah, Councilmember Friedson.
Yeah, well, I'll just note, if there are personnel that are required at DPS, this may not generate any revenue at all. So just to be clear on that, based on the number of exemptions, based on what we just learned today, if in fact the concerns that the chair and council president noted are that there are administrative burdens and administrative needs here. I mean, $20,000 per unit with all the exemptions that we just heard, we may be creating a situation where we're talking about revenue that doesn't really exist.
Okay. All right, Ms. Wellens, is there anything else in the packet?
No, that's it, Madam President. Thank you.
All right. Any other comments from my colleagues? Councilmember Katz, you want to start?
We're both being so very kind here today, a historical moment. First off, thank you very much, Ms. Wellens, and for giving us, as always, a very good packet. And I want to thank Councilmember Mink for bringing this suggestion before us and truly making us think about this topic and what might happen. I think we have to be clear. This is for a tax to generate funds and not stop something from being torn down, because that's what we want. We're saying we want the revenue. We're saying, and right now, depending on the year and depending on how things are, we have about 200 teardowns in a year. I guess, and I read it somewhere, and I've read enough on this to get nice and confused as well. But I think right now a permit is about $150, $160 to to go forward with this, besides all the other taxes and everything else, that revenue that brings to us. And it would go from about that, $160 to $20,000. I was in retail for many, many years, and I realized that if you raise your price that dramatically, you're not going to have the same volume. It's just not going to be there. So for a tax revenue to do this is not going to be anywhere near 200. If at any, and if somebody says, you know what, I was going to tear down my house, I'm not going to give the extra fees for taxes, et cetera, that you're going to lose that. So therefore, you've actually lost beyond that. I saw in the packet that this is based on Evanston, Illinois. And it's the same $20,000 fee, and I looked up Evanston, and it's about 75,000 people that live there, compared to over 1,100,000 here. And so it's really not apples to apples. And I looked up, and AI gave me the information. I put in, how much did Evanston generate by having this demolition tax? And I think they call it an affordable housing demolition tax. And according to AI, I'm quoting them, they don't quote me, thank goodness, but I'm quoting them, that it generated about $60,000 annually. So it's not going to, and then I looked up what county is Evanston, Illinois in. It's my understanding it's in Cook County. They have a $10,000 fee, and I think they generated about, and I don't know what year now, but they generated only about $30,000. So this is something that is not what I believe is going to be anywhere near what we are trying to do, which is, I mean, when you realize taxes are a redistribution of wealth, that's the whole idea of a tax. And we're not going to have any wealth to redistribute. So I'm not going to vote in favor of this, but I do appreciate the conversation. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilman Katz. Councilmember Friedson.
Appreciate it. Well, first of all, thank you, Councilmember Mink. I really appreciate your interest in the Housing Production Fund. I was proud to champion that, work together very closely with Councilmember Reamer at the time and HOC to help to create that. I have testified in Chicago and Rhode Island and Boston, and I'm proud to see in Oregon, at the Oregon legislature, that jurisdictions all over the country are following our lead in creating this model. I'll note that the city of Chicago has announced that they have a $135 million fund, which is one of the reasons why I've been trying for us to increase our fund from $100 million to $150 million, because we started this and we should be leading this. And that's why, and I'm pleased that the council agreed for us to set aside funds during the budget so that we can continue to have the conversations that we're having at the state level to work together and work with Secretary Day, who I just was speaking to yesterday, and move forward with the efforts that Delegate Stewart was able to put forward in order for us to hopefully move forward with the next tranche of that effort. Having said that, I don't think that this is the right mechanism for us to move forward. I'm skeptical on what the revenue will actually be. As we talked about today, there are a lot of exemptions. We're talking about on average 200 homes at the peak of this, which we've seen. There are questions of how the cost of construction and other factors will impact this market in general. And then we have all these exemptions, which we don't really know what the numbers are because we don't calculate that. And so when push comes to shove, it's just unclear to me how much we'd actually be generating. And I am concerned that we didn't have Department of Permitting Services here to really understand how they intend to implement this, particularly without any staff resources. And if they do need any staff resources, I'm afraid this will actually cost us money and not generate the revenue that we're looking for. So let's add money to the Housing Production Fund. Let's commit ourselves to that. I'll note that each time one of these teardowns happen, and I understand many neighbors don't like teardowns in their community. But the one positive that is undeniable is that they generate a lot of revenue. We get a lot more tax revenue when a tear down takes place, and particularly after the council took the actions that it has on the recordation tax increases, particularly on units that are above $1 million, substantial increases. All of these tear downs are over $1 million, and all of them pay substantially more than the $20,000 as a result of that work. So I am not going to be supporting this. I appreciate the effort and the interest. I look forward to other mechanisms that I think are both more reliable and also would have a greater impact and generate more revenue than this one, in order to increase the housing production fund, which I think we desperately need to do, and appreciate colleagues for their work on this, and Councilmember Vink in particular.
Thank you. As I said before, I very much appreciate Councilmember Mink's work on this, increasing the amount of money to the Affordable Housing Production Fund is very important. I have heard from residents, the frustration and looking at how we can put more money into that, and then seeing tear downs and what they're doing in the community. I plan to vote for this, though. The recommendation will be 2-1 from the committee. I will just say that I appreciate all the work that went into this and the thoughtfulness. And I do want to say that I am just, I really do hope the representative from DPS is fine and nothing detracted them from being here today, except hopefully it got put on their calendar wrong. So let's hope that. Again, I guess this vote will be 2-1 on government operations. And I thank everyone who was here regarding this item, and we will continue to have conversations about the Affordable Housing Production Fund. So thank you very much.
Including August 4th, when our friends from across the way come to visit us. So we look forward to welcoming them.
Yes, and I'm sorry, Councilmember Mink would like to have one final remark.
Thank you. I appreciate the committee for the thoughtful discussion. Thank you to the council president for the amendments and for the support. I look forward to continuing the conversation as well. And I agree with Councilmember Katz that Evanston is very different. I agree with that. That was one of the pieces that I found useful there to see that because it's such a smaller market, to be confident that if we kept the fee the same, then we would not be having a meaningful impact on the number of flips there, as they did not see an impact on the number of flips in Evanston. But I think that the points raised are all really important. We certainly we want to generate as much at a time as possible. So if there's too many exemptions, I think that is definitely something to look at, and it'll be great to get some more information, more details about the types of impact that each of those exemptions have. So thank you all for a great conversation, and look forward to talking more.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilmember Mink. All right, we're on to our third item of the day, and this is Bill 21-25. Daycare and child care property tax credit. And thank you everyone who was here for the prior discussion. This bill is one that I'm taking the lead on, and I'm glad to say we have many co-sponsors, including my colleagues here and Councilmember Albanaz, Council Vice President Jawando, Councilmember Glass, Sales, and Lukey. Basically, what this bill would do would be expand the property tax credit for child care providers in our county. As we know, not just here in Montgomery County, but across Maryland, we are facing a child care crisis. A report by the Comptroller's Office showed that Maryland has lost 15.5% of licensed providers and over 1,000 home-based providers in recent years. This decline has reduced child care options for families, increased wait lists, and put a strain on working parents in our county. And we also know that childcare and providing it is not just about a parenting issue, but it's an economic issue for our county. In the last legislative session, State Bill HB 389 was sponsored by Delegate Julie Polakovich Carr and signed into law by Governor Moore. This year enables the county to modernize and expand our tax credit to better reflect today's needs. The intent of that state enabling legislation and our bill is to provide targeted tax breaks that will help keep existing and new child care providers in operation while also continuing to incentivize construction. The bill would increase the maximum credit from $3,000 to $10,000, making it more meaningful for providers facing high operational costs, and remove the outdated requirement that only facilities improved after 1987 or 1988 are eligible. It would also expand eligibility to include large family child care homes, which serve 9 to 12 children, and update outdated terminology to align with state law. These changes will enable expanded enhancements to real property used by large family child care homes and strengthen child care infrastructure for Montgomery County families. With that, Ms. Wellens, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Madam President. There are not any potential amendments for the committee's consideration. I will note in the summary of public hearing, there was overwhelming support, including from Delegate Polakovich Carr and representatives of the Community Action Board and others. The staff packet, the memorandum, has just some additional background information, including a link for those who would like to delve deeper into the state enabling legislation and the legislative history there. There's a clarification about what is meant by improvements on properties, and the tax applies to improvements, and obviously that's a term that's used in kind of the property tax world, but not necessarily accessible to all of us in the public. So just a clarification there. And that's really it. I'm happy to try to answer any questions. Office of Management and Budget is here as well.
Great, thank you. Any questions or comments on this one? No. Go ahead, Councilmember Jones.
Yeah, thank you very much. This one, candidly, is as close to a no-brainer for me as we've had up here. I think this is needed. I think it's needed immediately, and I look forward to voting for it. Thanks.
I would say it's a brain enricher, not a no-brainer, because childcare
See, I shouldn't
is
have let you go first.
so important. And I just want to thank the Council President Chair for her leadership on this. We have been working so hard at the state level, at the county level, to try to address the crisis of childcare costs. This is just devastating families. And one of the biggest challenges besides housing, childcare is really such a vexing economic and moral challenge that we face, and something that so many young families are grappling with as we speak. So appreciate your work on this. This is not going to solve the problem. Like in housing, there's not one silver bullet solution that is going to make the difference and be the one thing that changes everything. But it is something, and it moves us in a positive direction. It will help, and it will make a massive impact for those that it supports, and it helps, and is one more example of ways that we're trying to work together with our providers to be able to create opportunities for more families and create opportunities in particular for our youngest residents. So thank you for your leadership.
Thank you. I do want to note in Delegate Julie Polakovich Carr's testimony, and one of the things that we want to work with the county exec's office on as this hopefully I think we'll move forward at full council is the outreach. Existing tax credits only reached 5 businesses in the county. This was highlighted, and so making sure that we get that information out there. That was also something that was raised in the racial equity and social justice impact statement, that it's great when we have things on the books, but if people don't know about them, and I would say particularly our child care providers, our family child care providers, they are so busy. There is so much that they need to qualify for, fill out, and do in the county and in the state, that making it easy for them to understand and know this is available is important. And the other group of folks are renters, because this is intended to be for providers, whether they own or rent their facility. So that was also important point that Delegate Polakovich-Carr raised. So I think as we move this forward, we look forward to working with the county exec's office to also make sure like we're rolling it out there and people know about it. So I think with that, we have a unanimous committee recommendation to move this one forward. So thank you, Ms. Wellens. Thank you for everyone who is here today. We are adjourned as the Government Operations and Fiscal Policy Committee. We will be back later today with Econ and then back again with PHP. So thank you, everyone.
Cool.